You're listening to Underworld on the Ghost Radio Network.
Ghost Radio Australia.
Listen.
Hauntings. The unexplained. Synchronicity. EVP.
So why are you?
I heard that.
Absolutely fascinating.
What are Midlights? Is it real? What do you think?
I love you.
The unseen.
I'm alright.
1111. Who or what are mutilating cattle?
Listen.
Poltergeists. Your stories. Your experiences. Listen close.
Nick Redfern, Monster Hunter, is our guest tonight. Nick is very well known for his books on cryptozoology and ufology. He is British born but has been living in Dallas, Texas since 2001. That's where he joins us from now. Welcome to Ghost Radio, Nick.
Hey Leah, how's it going?
Good, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Been a
Thank you.
avid follower of your work for quite some time. One of the things that separate you and other cryptozoologists is probably your zooform stuff and your understanding that cryptozoology can sometimes have a paranormal aspect. I've always liked that about you and your work, and I want to get into that in a little bit. But let's start off first, letting people know your background. You are a freelance writer, journalist who started out in kind of a rock magazine type world, as well as other mainstream newspapers and publications, of course. How did you go from that to crypto and ufology?
Well, that's probably a good question. What actually happened was that when I finished school, as you just mentioned, I began working on a rock music magazine in England called Zero, and the guys at the magazine basically sort of taught me everything from interview techniques, page layout design, all sorts of different aspects of working on a high-tech, fast-paced magazine. And I did that for a couple of years and then enjoyed it, but unfortunately that job came to an end, the magazine closed down, and I thought, well, what am I going to do now? And I kind of roamed around just doing a few dead-end jobs for a couple of years, nothing I particularly enjoyed. But having worked on that magazine, I enjoyed and developed this interest in writing and media work. And I had an interest in, paranormal things going back to when I was about 5. My parents took me one week when I was just a little kid. We went to Scotland on holiday for a week and spent a day at Loch Ness, and my dad told me this story about the Loch Ness Monster, and even though I was only like 5 or 6 at the time, I've still got a couple of fragments of memories of standing on the shore and him relating this story to me. And even at that age, I certainly wasn't running around like some precocious little kid investigating monsters, but it did, spark my imagination in terms of thinking, wow, there are real life monsters out there. And then of course, as you develop, you realise that monster is more of like a media term, and we're largely talking about, unknown animals and things like that. And I guess as I developed an interest in cryptozoology, that sort of expanded into UFOs, paranormal phenomena, and then having done these various dead-end jobs for a couple of years, I thought, well, why don't I try and get back into the writing field, but combine that with the interest that I've developed in the paranormal since, standing on the shores of Loch Ness. And so that's basically what I did, and then began contacting various magazines and publishers in England, newspapers, and started to build up that sort of freelance background and to where I am now, I suppose.
And it's worked very well for you. I mean, is it 13 books in print now, not to mention the articles and the documentaries and all the rest of them?
Yeah, I've done 13 books, and I'm always writing sort of 2 or 3 at a time. And I mean, as far as magazine work is concerned, I do a lot for UFO magazine, Fortean Times, and people like that.
I just actually read your Fortean Times article on the movie that you reviewed, which sounds rather entertaining.
Occasional Monsters, is that one?
That one, yeah.
Yeah, that's a pretty good film, actually. It's like a road trip type story. You know, I think anyone who's got sort of an appreciation for cryptozoology but doesn't mind having a joke or two about the subject as well, he's going to find it fun and interesting.
For sure. As I said at the top of the interview, one of the things that separates you from some other cryptozoologists is your theories on, the hairy man, Bigfoot, Yeti, not being completely flesh and blood as we know it, that there is some paranormal overtones to these sightings, perhaps. I've always liked your theory, and I can see where you're coming from. Can you elaborate and tell the listeners about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I sort of really first began developing a serious interest in my teams in cryptozoology, I think, like a lot of cryptozoologists, to me, Bigfoot was a giant ape. The Loch Ness Monster was like a surviving plesiosaur, dinosaur of some sort. The Yeti was probably a giant ape as well, etc., etc. Now, that could well be the case. I'm not disputing that it may all just come back to the flesh and blood. However, one of the things that I found, and I think all cryptozoologists would admit this, even if they agreed with the data or not, is that, for every 10, 15 so-called conventional sightings of these creatures where somebody sees something in the woods or, a long net pops out of a lock or whatever, for every 10 or 15 of those, we get 1 or 2 that seem far stranger. And they seem to fall into several categories. One, there are a number of Bigfoot reports where the creature has reportedly literally just kind of vanished in the blink of an eye, or footprint tracks have just come to a complete halt in the snow as if the creature's vanished. There are a lot of reports when people try to photograph these things that their cameras have jammed or the pictures haven't come out. Now, in England, for example, we get a lot of Bigfoot reports also, but there's just no way that in a country the size of the British Isles that a creature or a colony of creatures of 7-foot tall apes could hide in Britain and not be found. It's just not possible. Plus, there certainly isn't enough wild animal food, for them to feed on. Again, without farmers or whoever finding evidence of their animals having been killed on a massive scale. And certainly, a 7-foot tall, 400 or 500 pound ape man is going to require a hell of a lot of food. So we have these problems. And also in Britain, a lot of the Bigfoot type reports have been cited around ancient stone circles. Not so much Stonehenge, but similar, lesser known, smaller ones. And when you collectively look at all this data, it seems to suggest that I'm not ruling out the flesh and blood angle of this. What I am saying, though, is that I don't think that explains the complete nature of what these things are, that there seems to be something else going on. People talk about other dimensions and the paranormal, and I think to some extent we're still using simplistic terms to understand and explain a phenomenon that we don't really understand. So when I say paranormal, I think what I'm really saying is that we just don't understand the full nature of these things, and that there is an extra dimension to their activities. And I think that also accounts for why so many of these things are still elusive, why we haven't caught them. People say, well, there's not that many of them left, and some of these areas are remote. And I think that is actually true. But, after decades and decades of searching for Bigfoot, not to get even one single piece of definitive physical evidence suggests to me that these things are more than just lucky in avoiding us. That it seems that they're one step ahead of us all the while, and they're not just some sort of dumb, brutish creatures, that they may be actually very intelligent as well.
So what type of paranormal abilities are we talking about? You mentioned footprints that just disappear into the snow. Are we talking about time shifting or alternative realities, or?
Well, I don't so much think time shifting necessarily, but certainly there are. I mean, I've probably got at least 15 or 20 reports on file from Britain, from the US, from South America, from Canada, where the witnesses have told very similar stories, and they seem to revolve around these creatures either having the ability to vanish, I mean literally vanish, and then we could be talking about dimensions, or that they seem to have almost like chameleon-like qualities where they appear to vanish, or the witness's temporal lobes and vision is affected by this creature, and it allows it to escape, but to us it looks like it's vanished. There are a number of people who've said that they felt that when they literally stumbled across this creature in the woods, 20 feet away from them, and it looked at them, it was like it was almost hypnotizing them, and they felt it an altered reality, and then the creature kind of backed away, and they couldn't remember how it vanished. It was almost like, the idea of a snake entrancing a rabbit or something like that, and we're the rabbit. But instead of attacking, it uses some sort of mental power to possibly disable us to make it escape, but we interpret that disablement as the creature just vanished in the blink of an eye. So I think it could be something like that. But then again, there are even stranger reports. I've got several on file where people were driving through woods late at night, saw this large hairy thing cross the road maybe 100 yards in front of them, 50 feet in front of them even, and as they did so, suddenly their engine and car headlights failed, and they couldn't restart the engine until like a minute or two after the creature had vanished. Now, had this just occurred on one occasion, you could quite reasonably say that the whole event was just coincidence. Somebody saw something at the same time that their engine failed. However, when this happens on a number of occasions, you have to begin to wonder, is it just coincidence or is there a pattern? And if there's a pattern, there's no normal animal on this planet that can render car engines useless or entrance humans to that extent, or, so again, some of these stranger aspects of footprints just coming to a complete halt. So that's why I think we're looking at creatures that seem to have pretty weird mental powers that can affect us, and that may exist in some other realm of existence. Now, of course, if we're going to say that, we need to try and determine what that realm is, and I think right now that's the thing that's a little bit beyond our grasp. There is a lot of research being done in the areas of things like quantum physics to explain the notion that other forms of reality, other realms of reality could exist. And possibly if they do, maybe some of these things, can quite easily negotiate one realm to the other. If you look at nature, it's not impossible for some creatures to have skills and talents that go far beyond ours. For example, you look at electric eels that can discharge an electric shock to disable their prey. That sounds almost like magic. Or a bat, having like a quasi-radar ability to fly at night. We just can't match those skills. Or, you ask a human being to spin a spider web. There's no person on the planet who could ever do that. So I think, although we're, I guess, allegedly the most intelligent creature on the planet, there could be other creatures that have far stranger skills as well, that in that sense at least, they kind of outdo us.
I agree, and like I said, I've personally always liked your theories. Is it only the Bigfoot, hairy bipedal men we're talking about, or do the black cats or the chupacabra or anything like that have these abilities, or is it?
That's a good question. It's a good question. I mean, there are. If you go, for example, back to Loch Ness, people always associate Loch Ness with the Loch Ness monster. But there's been a lot of really strange activity at Loch Ness of a completely different nature. For example, 15, 20 years before the main wave of Loch Ness monster sightings began in the 1930s. None other than Alistair Crowley, so-called Great Beast, had a house at Loch Ness called Boleskine House, and he undertook all sorts of weird rites and rituals at Loch Ness to try and conjure up demons. And there are reports of the Loch Ness Monster, where people tried to take photographs of it, again to have their cameras jam or the pictures not come out. There are a number of people who claim to have seen UFOs over the loch and even had Men in Black type encounters at Loch Ness, one involving a man named Ted Holliday. And there was a monster hunter who began with the idea that these were flesh and blood, and then came around to the idea that these were paranormal type creatures. And he personally had a whole range of paranormal activity at the loch, including sighting a classic Man in Black. So, you know, we have that aspect. Now, I've been on several expeditions. You mentioned the Chupacabras of Puerto Rico. I've been on several expeditions to Puerto Rico looking for this creature. And a lot of the reports talk about the creature, you know, looking like a flesh and blood animal and not doing anything out of the ordinary. But in saying that, on every occasion I've been there, I've heard stories from the locals about occult-based groups, supposedly, again, like Crowley, undertaking ancient rites and rituals to try and conjure these creatures up from who knows where, and successfully doing it. And, you know, if you look at some of the Chupacabras reports that I've uncovered, for example, of creatures with large bat-like wings and glowing red eyes, and in some cases just literally vanishing again, they sound like something like a classic gargoyle, you know, or something that stepped out of hell or something like that. You know, they don't just sound like a flesh and blood animal. Now, I'm not saying all of the crypto creatures out there fall into that category. I don't believe they do. I think, for example, some of the lake monsters could be things like giant eels, mutated giant fish, and who knows, you know, in the oceans particularly, maybe some of them are indeed creatures that science tells us have become extinct, but that maybe have survived extinction. So I think that's a possibility. But, you know, when we have these other creatures that have been sighted for years and years that have these paranormal qualities to them, and that forever elusive, and we never get any conclusive evidence, it's almost like they're like a ghostly form in some capacity, like quasi-ghostly / flesh and blood that seems to easily straddle both camps, but doesn't really exist in either, shall we say.
I was going to say, so it's kind of, Loch Ness might be a plesiosaur with paranormal abilities.
Well, I don't know if I would go that far, but I think if it's a flesh and blood animal, I think plesiosaurs would probably just, you know, be regular flesh and blood creatures. But if the Loch Ness Monster is flesh and blood, then again it seems to have odd qualities to it. You know, I think the big problem we face is not that we don't have enough evidence that something's going on. It's just we're not, with our current levels of science and technology, we're not able to make the leap to determine how and why these creatures are seemingly able to do these things.
Because the thing,
where they go to when they vanish.
Well, the thing about particularly Loch Ness, as I know you'll be able to verify, is Loch Ness is huge. People think it's just a little lake and you bob around there on your boat. It's not. It's massive.
Yeah, it's actually like 22 miles long. At its widest point, nearly a mile wide, and at its deepest point, it's about 850 feet. And some people have said that, you know, there may be a few lower points where it even extends to almost 1,000 feet. So, you know, 22 miles by 1 mile by 1,000 feet is a long body of water. It's not, as you say, as some people think, you know, a little lake you can take the kids on and have a nice little picnic on the boat or whatever. It's not like that. And, you know, the water's very dark. So the idea that a creature, flesh and blood or quasi-flesh and blood, could exist there, or a colony of creatures, actually isn't out of the question. You know, if these creatures derive their oxygen from water like fish, and they don't have to surface that often, well, you know, the chances of being in the right place at the right time in such a huge body of water at a time when the creature just decides to surface when it doesn't really need to because it's a fish, a water-dwelling animal. You know, it actually isn't surprising that there aren't that many reports.
Yeah.
You have to be really lucky and in the right place.
Exactly. One of your favourite stories, I know, you don't think of Britain, probably, well, I didn't at least, having Bigfoot, but it actually has its own called the man monkey, which you've done extensive research on. Can you tell us about that? It's also the subject of one of your books.
Yeah, the man monkey is a case that for me sort of typifies this paranormal aspect of Bigfoot. The man monkey is one of the earliest so-called British Bigfoot reports, and this, as far as we can tell at least, there are rumours that the stories might go back earlier, but there are rumours from the mid-1800s, but the story really kicks off in 1879 at a little village in central England, ironically actually not too far from where I used to live. The whole area is quite heavily wooded, and it dealt with a man who was walking home late one night with a horse and cart along one of the little winding roads that runs through this old village of Ranton, and as he crossed the bridge, which runs over an old canal, the bridge and the canal are still there to this day and haven't really changed, but as he was walking over the bridge, he described how this large monkey-like creature, about 5 to 5.5 feet tall, jumped out of the woods and bounced onto the back of his cart, and the horse went wild, and it was like a crazy scene. And he described this monkey-like creature as having glowing eyes, and he got a horse's whip with him, which he tried to strike the creature with, and said that it went straight through the creature. Again, which kind of, although it was able to leap on the cart, makes it sound like a physical creature, but then when he hit it, it sounded almost like spectral in nature. And it just literally vanished in the darkness. And he, as a lot of English people probably would have done, he raced to the nearest pub and got himself a stiff drink and tried to calm down and told people what happened. Now, there's several interesting things about this. One is the self-illuminating glowing eyes that the creature had, which is a characteristic in a lot of Bigfoot reports. Now, obviously, if you're driving down the road and you catch an animal in the headlights of your vehicle, the eyes seem to light up. But when they're self-illuminating and there's no artificial light around, that's a completely different matter. Then we have the issue of the creature vanishing in the blink of an eye. And the third issue, or 4 or 5 issues, that a lot of people actually don't realise or forget, is the location, this ancient bridge. And bridges, for some reason, seem to attract a lot of paranormal legends and tales. I'm sure you get them in Australia as well.
Yeah.
If you go over this one particular bridge, there's a troll or something lives beneath it, or, there's a ghostly lady who haunts the bridge, that sort of thing.
I was going to say, usually it's ghosts. There's a ghost at the bridge and, somebody jumped off or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So you get a lot of paranormal tales associated with bridges, just like the man monkey. Now, ever since that report in 1879, although there haven't been, hundreds of reports, there have been a number of reports of people seeing this creature since 1879, yet always alone. No one's ever described, seeing more than one creature or a colony living in the woods, which, of course, unless these creatures have really extraordinary qualities, the idea that they could exist for 130, 140 years, in one lifespan seems a little bit out of the question. So, again, we have to look at that issue and the fact that, again, the area that I talk about, although it's heavily wooded, there isn't much wildlife there, and certainly the local farmers would know if their sheep were being slaughtered for food every night, but we're not seeing that. So what we are seeing is a creature that, from a physical perspective, looks like a large ape, but everything about it smacks of that this just cannot be. There's no evidence of it eating food, any sort of food. It seems to be ever present over 130 years, and it can vanish and appear in the blink of an eye. And I got quite a few reports over the years and wrote a book on the man monkey, which really tried to get across to the reader the various accounts that the witnesses had reported, and then address the different theories that might lie at the heart of the mystery. But for me, that was one of the defining cases that made me realise that as much as it would be easier and preferable to think that these things are flesh and blood animals, that on the face of it, when you look at it, that they defy logic and convention is probably the best way of describing it.
And the other interesting thing I've always found about a lot of these crypto animals, I mean, the man monkey, I mean, yes, it jumped on that man's cart and stuff like that, but a lot of the Yowie reports over here, a lot of the Bigfoot reports, even the chupacabra, I mean, as you said, it is kind of the monster of all of them. It's not a nice looking thing. It means Latin for goat sucker, and it does attack animals and things like that. But you've never, or you might be able to tell me, there doesn't appear to be any reports of these animals attacking humans.
No, you're quite right. That's an interesting observation, because I tell you, I have got a lot of reports of, and this is kind of interesting but sort of weird and kind of creepy as well. And I've got a lot of this in werewolf reports also, where people have stumbled across these creatures, and the animals themselves haven't displayed outright hostility, but what they have done instead, the witnesses have said they felt that the creature has almost, I guess, emanated or projected a feeling of fear. Not that the creature's fearful, but almost like it's been able to instill fear and dread in the person that's seen it as a way of driving them away.
As a defence mechanism.
I remember one witness told me she felt it was like, I guess, what a person who might have a panic attack would feel like. But she felt that the creature was generating it in her to try and drive her away from it. That it wasn't, it had no intentions of killing her or harming her physically, but it wanted her gone, and the best way to do it was to kind of, I guess, upset her emotional state. And I've got that from a number of witnesses to Bigfoot, to the chupacabra, particularly in weird werewolf-type reports also. And again, this is from several countries, which leads me to believe that, I don't think, unless, it really came down to it, these things seem particularly hostile in terms of, being lethal, but they do seem to have the ability to, I guess, scare us away sounds a little bit too simplistic, it sounds like a little kid running away from, the shadow or whatever, but to unsettle us and make us disorient us, things like that.
They seem to use it as a defence mechanism. I was speaking to an Australian cryptozoologist and naturalist about a month ago, and I asked him if he'd ever seen a yowie, and he said he'd never seen one. He'd seen some nests, but he also, the closest encounter he ever had was a beast or a being that made so much noise. It was like it was running around him, making as much thrashing, bashing noise as it could to scare the heck out of him. And yet when it came so close that he could have seen it, everything went very silent.
Yeah, that's actually a good way of describing it, like a defence mechanism. Now, if this is a defence mechanism, and I think it is, if they can actually project something that disorients us or, can create an intense feeling of fear and hostility to where people back away and leave the area, again, that suggests these creatures have skills, talents, senses, if you like, that extend far beyond those that we would normally attribute either to us or to other animals. So I think there is a deep aspect to that, and of course also, if you look at the great apes, for example, now they don't exhibit obviously paranormal qualities, but you will very often find, for example, in things like silverback gorillas, which look really intimidating and could, take your head off with just a punch. They're huge, very, very powerful creatures. Yet, if you intrude on their territory, they'll kind of have like a lot of bluff and bravado and charge you. But they very often, at the last minute, will back away.
Yes.
They won't resort to outright physical confrontation with people. they're quite gentle creatures, and they obviously will defend their families and territory. But a lot of it is bluff and bravado designed to scare you. And I'm quite sure that in most people, if you're charged by a huge lumbering silverback gorilla, it's going to work.
I'd run, yeah. What has been, in your field investigation for your books and whatever, your most unnerving experience? Is it with the chupacabra?
Well, I would say it's kind of having experienced some of these unsettling feelings in areas where these creatures have been seen. I mean, I'll give you a classic example that I talk about in my There's Something in the Woods book. In January 2008, that's right, I was just trying to figure out when it was. I went out to a large wooded area of Texas called Lake Ray Roberts, which is about an hour's drive north of the city of Dallas. And a lot of people think Texas is all just plains and desert and cactus and John Wayne type countryside, which is what I thought when I came over. But actually, this part of Texas and the east part is actually quite heavily wooded and forested. Mm-hmm. And Lake Ray Roberts is a classic example. There have been a lot of Bigfoot reports from the woods of Lake Ray Roberts, and I went out there with a friend and a fellow paranormal researcher named Lance Oliver in January 2008, and we went and had a look around this particular area, and I got, at this particular location, this weird, unsettling feeling, not because, I was excited and to be out looking for the creature, but it was like the air became very still, very quiet. There was this feeling that, everybody gets when you think you're being watched and you turn around and somebody's looking at you. Kind of that situation, and it was almost like being in a vacuum, and like an oppressive vacuum as well, as if we weren't supposed to be there, as if, things weren't quite right, but you couldn't put your finger on why they weren't quite right. And, as long as I stayed there, which was like an hour and a half probably, and we actually found some weird tree formations where branches have been broken off and kind of positioned in almost like a message, and particular formations that obviously been made with intelligence. As long as we stayed there and got as many photos as I could, etc., it still didn't feel right. It felt weird and unsettling, and as I said, kind of being like in a vacuum, or some sort of almost like an altered state, and it was kind of a relief to leave the area. And the strange thing was that when we got out the wooded area and headed down to the lake itself, that oppressive feeling just was gone. It was just lifted, and that was sort of really weird.
Did all of your pictures turn out?
All the pictures did turn out. That was the interesting thing, and there's actually a few pictures in the book from when we went out there, and one of them displays one of these weird tree formations, and this is actually something we get in a lot of Bigfoot reports. They become known, in the US at least, as Bigfoot teepees, where something with clearly a lot of strength has wrenched thick branches off of trees and positioned them in kind of like pentagon formations or pyramid-like formations. Some people suggest they're like territorial markers that these creatures build for others of their species or whatever, to say, hey, stay away or come closer even, who knows. But it seems where we get a lot of Bigfoot reports, we do get these weird tree formations as well, and at Lake Ray Roberts Lake, we found maybe 7 or 8 of them in varying sizes.
One of my favourite crypto animals is, I don't know why, I was just thinking it's quite odd really for anybody to like this creature, let alone a woman, but the Mongolian death worm. I just think it's almost like folklore because no one's actually seen the thing, but it's very interesting, isn't it?
Oh yeah, the death worm's a weird creature. I actually run the US office of a British organisation called the Centre for Fortean Zoology, which is run by a good friend of mine, John Downs. And Richard Freeman is a resident zoologist at the centre, and Richard used to be a head keeper at a zoo in England called Twycross Zoo. And Richard and the CFZ had a team that went out to Mongolia a couple of years ago to look for this creature called the death worm. And the best way to describe it is that reports sort of describe a creature anywhere from about 2 to 5 feet long, looking like a thick, writhing worm, but it lives in the sands of Mongolia, and like an electric eel, supposedly, it can discharge an electric shock through the ground to disable its prey, and then, you know, it'll surface from the sands and then eat the animal, you know, whether it's a goat or whatever it is. And in some respects, although they're smaller, it almost sounds, if you've seen the film Tremors, which is this, I think, made in 1990, like a sci-fi horror film with Kevin Bacon. It's like a comedy sci-fi film about these giant worms that live underground and, you know, come up and attack people, etc. It's a little bit more dramatic than the death worm story,
Yeah.
but it's kind of a similar thing. And you know, the story sounds kind of unusual and outrageous. The idea of a giant worm 5 feet long being able to discharge electric shocks, but then again, you know, that's precisely what electric eels do. And of course, there aren't that many people who've been to such remote locations as Mongolia, specifically looking for the creature. So if it exists and it spends most of its time underground, then perhaps we wouldn't see it that often. But within the culture and the folklore and legends of Mongolia, and the, you know, the villagers, the townsfolk, etc., there are a lot of stories of this creature. And granted, there aren't that many of people claiming to have seen it in modern days, but, you know, legends have been passed down from earlier generations of people who claim to have seen the creature. Now, of course, you know, we either have to take this as just modern day folklore that's, you know, developed over the centuries, or there could be some truth to it. And hopefully, I think Richard at some point is going to make another expedition back there. So, you know, I think this is what we have to do. We have to, with something like cryptozoology, you know, the internet can be a great resource tool, but if you're going to go and try and resolve the matter of the death worm or the Loch Ness Monster, you've got to get out there. You know, the internet alone isn't going to cut it. You've just got to get out to these locations to try and find them.
Do the field work, yeah. You've actually done a great story, or a great article this month at mania.com about another worm of Avery, the great worm of Avery, which I thought was just the most fantastic story.
Yeah, that's a weird one. I mean, Britain, again, also like Mongolia, has a long and rich and varied history or folklore of people seeing giant worms, one of the most famous one being a story of the Lambton worm. And in many cases they're associated with the Middle Ages and stories of knights in shining armour on horseback slaying them. Kind of have some sort of parallels with, you know, dragon tales as well, of knights killing the dragons. But some of the stories, you know, just don't come across like fire-breathing dragons. They do sound like giant worms of some sort. Now, you know, why that should be the case, we just don't know. Unless, you know, up to 400 or 500 years ago, perhaps, who knows, maybe Britain was home to some elusive, large worm-like creature that just became extinct before science had a chance to classify what it was. And perhaps that's what some of these stories relate to. We just don't know. But, again, there are a number of accounts which, again, seem to veer towards the paranormal. And there was this story I published at Mania, which is a site. I write a regular weekly article there called Lair of the Beasts, which is sort of a combination of news stories and some stories from my archives, etc. And this case involved a woman who was living in the vicinity of Avebury, which is an old village in England which has a very ancient and renowned stone circle, the Avebury Stone Circle, right in its midst. And it isn't that far from Stonehenge or Silbury Hill, other very, very ancient structures used by ancient man. And she talked about how in the 1960s she'd been walking around the stones. She actually lived in the village and had seen this little ball of light flitting through the stones. Had no idea what it was, obviously. Watched it kind of entranced, and then she said it sort of exploded, almost like a camera flash, and when the light faded, the ball of light was gone, and in its place was this sort of weird, again, large, writhing worm-like creature, sort of the size of a snake, but with more worm-like qualities and appearance, and quite naturally she sort of fled the scene and contacted the police, who didn't really take it seriously but referred her to a local Royal Air Force base. And it seems to be the reason why they referred her to the Royal Air Force was because she initially talked about seeing this light in the sky, which she described as like a UFO. And Royal Air Force bases will take UFO reports. They'll listen to them. So that's what she did. She phoned, spoke to someone in a pre-hysterical state, and obviously the person at the other end of the phone realised after a while, that this wasn't some sort of hoax. And apparently the next day, somebody went out from the base, as they occasionally do in some of the more interesting UFO reports, and the woman took the guy out to the location, and according to the story at least, they did find like some sort of slimy substance, and the guy allegedly collected it, and what the outcome was in terms of analysing it, we just don't know. But at least when it comes to the story, I mean, it's like a lot of these stories, you have to take it at face value or not. And for me, when you speak to witnesses and judge their characters, then you become a good judge of character, I suppose. And to me, the woman did come across, or I should say the person I interviewed who was relating her story came across solid, reliable, truthful, with no axe to grind. And I think that's an important point to where, when we're dealing things with things like this, that we need to not just listen to the story, but try and assess the witness or the person relating the account. So this was like a modern day parallel of some of these old worm-like stories, and who knows, maybe these things did exist, and possibly, as some people think, in the many caverns and caves under England, could still exist.
Yes, exactly. Talking about blobs, I don't know, my husband brought to my attention a news article about a giant mystery blob that's moving through Alaskan waters. Have you seen that?
Oh, no, I haven't seen that one at all, no.
It was only on Fox News yesterday. It's a strange biological blob which is drifting in the ocean, drifting the currents off Alaska's northern coast, and it's something like 12 miles long, and it's collecting jellyfish and seems to be attaching itself to ice for a while, and then it moves on. There's remains of a goose in there. The only thing they know it's not is an oil slick or anything like that. They say it's a biological thing, and it's quite revolting if you go to the so there you go, a modern day biological blob moving around in the Alaskan waters as we speak.
Oh well, I'll have to check that one out.
I'll send you the link. It's quite odd.
All right, thank you.
Down here in Australia, of course, you've not been to Australia, have you?
No, I never have, unfortunately. My parents have. They've been several times.
You'll have to come down and visit us, and because as I'm sure you would know through the CFC, the thylacine. Lots of people swear it exists, and of course our giant goannas and little hairy men. There's lots of things to investigate down here, Nick.
Oh yeah, that's right. I mean, I'd love to get out there. I mean, as you said earlier, you referred to the yowie and the thylacine. To me, those are creatures that, it'd be great to sort of get out there and investigate and, spend a week on an expedition or something like that. I think the yowie particularly, that's one that sort of fascinates me because, again, it's like a classic Bigfoot creature, but I know that there are some stories that, again, sort of parallel the high strangeness that's been reported elsewhere. So, yeah, I'd love to sort of to get out and, investigate the type of creatures that I've never really been exposed to before, other than in books. And that's one of the things that I suppose sometimes people don't realise is that, even for those of us that look for some of these things with the sheer size of the world, that a lot of our information just comes from books as well. It's only, I guess, it's only so much time and available to sort of travel around. So.
But you have done a lot of extensive travel. I mean, your field investigating is concise. Yeah,
I've done several expeditions to Puerto Rico, Loch Ness, various sites in the United States, and as I said earlier, I think with something like cryptozoology, that's really the only way you can do it. there's just no way you're going to get the answers by sitting at home.
Yes. Another thing that I discovered after reading your work was the, how do you say it, tulpas or tulpas? I'd never heard of them before.
Yeah. Tulpas are sorry, go on.
I was going to say, can you explain what they are?
Yeah, tulpas are an interesting phenomenon. They're sort of very, very prevalent in Tibetan and Buddhist lore. Basically, the idea is that the human mind has the ability to, I guess, construct intelligent beings or forms. Now, that sounds kind of strange, but I'll explain what it is. The idea is that if you either individually or collectively focus on one particular image, let's say, just for example, a white wolf, and you focus this image in your mind, you learn meditative techniques, etc., and you intensely focus on this maybe for several weeks, and then maybe one day, you pick the newspaper up and somebody 2 streets away from you said they were driving home late one night and this huge white wolf crossed the road in front of them. The idea is that the human mind can create sort of quasi-semi-physical entities and then outwardly project them, almost, I guess, as one person described it, it's like creating a mind monster. But then you project it outwards. Now, the Tibetan law states that if there's sufficient belief in the existence of this creature, what it can actually do is that it can take on its own sort of rudimentary self-awareness and self-existence. That's why people talking about, kind of giving birth to a mind monster, that's you actually not physically giving birth, but projecting something that then has its own form of existence, shall we say. Again, it's a controversial theory, but in some capacity, it has been used to possibly explain some of these crypto creatures. The idea that the more we believe in them, it actually adds weight to their existence because it's belief channels and fuels their existence and their quasi-state of existence, shall we say. And then as time passes and maybe people don't believe in them anymore, or belief dwindles, they seem to fade away. It's been applied to things like fairy encounters. When people in the Middle Ages believed in fairies, everybody was seeing fairies. And then as belief dwindles, so the fairies go away and they're replaced by something else. If you look at the UFO subject, for example, in the 1950s, a lot of the entities associated with UFOs look very much like us, with blonde hair, long blonde hair, and was claiming to come from Venus. As science developed and we were able to determine that there probably wasn't life on Venus and that anything visiting us probably wouldn't look identical to us, so the so-called space brothers went away, and now it's the little grey guys with the black eyes. So it's almost as if all the various phenomena are changing as our beliefs change, and that would be like a classic example of how a tulpa works. It changes and derives new forms based on the cultural beliefs of the people as a means to continue its existence.
Makes sense to me.
But it's very controversial, and a lot of people get a little bit, I wouldn't say freaked out, but there's a bit of rolling of eyes at times. But nevertheless, I'll give you one quick classic example. This has nothing to do with cryptozoology or UFOs, but back in the 70s, an experiment was done called the Philip experiment, where a group of people involved in paranormal research all agreed to try and conjure a character called Philip. And Philip was actually just someone who they created, and they gave him a name and a background, and that he supposedly lived in the Middle Ages, and they even created like a family for him, etc. But it was all fictional. But then they tried to determine if they could create him, and supposedly they did, and the characteristics that they gave him came through in this sort of discarnate entity that began to appear. So again, it was like they created a fictional identity, a fictional character who then came to life.
It's so weird that you should say that because I'm currently studying my certificate in parapsychology, and I was just thinking of that experiment, which is one of the ones that you'll come across all the time in parapsychology as kind of proof or existence of the afterlife or not. You know, it's one of the basic kind of ones they roll out. And then you just spoke about it.
Yeah, that's weird. That's like a little synchronicity.
It is. There you are. I'm in Australia. You're in Texas. Just high strangeness again, really. Now, you've been very generous with your time, but I can't let you go without asking, what's your favourite creature?
Well, I think for me at least, it would probably be the chupacabras, and I would say that, I think, primarily because when, living in England and investigating things like the Loch Ness Monster, you become, I won't say used to it, it's never unpredictable, and I think everybody recognises the imagery of Bigfoot, but I think going out to Puerto Rico for the first time, and not just looking for the creature, but being sort of exposed to a new culture as well, that was one of the most, I guess, enjoyable and favourite times, was looking for something totally different to anything else I'd ever pursued or searched for. Lake monsters are lake monsters all around the world, and, Bigfoot and the man-monkey, there's not that much difference, but when you're sort of in the Puerto Rico's El Yunque rainforest looking for a bat-winged gargoyle with glowing eyes that sucks blood, it's a little bit different, and I think so. I would say something like that. That was one of the most sort of enjoyable expeditions that I've been on.
I understand. NickRedfern.com is probably the best place to send people, I guess, isn't it? Or your blogs, or that you can get to the Centre for Fortean Zoology.
The website's NickRedfern.com, and all my various blogs are also linked at the website, so people can contact me there, and I always try and respond within about 2 days at the most if I can, and and just reply in a timely fashion if people contact me.
As I said, author of 13 books. Nick's also very well known for his ufology work as well, which is another great excuse to have you come back on the show, Nick. I hope you will come back and join us.
I'll be very happy to, thanks.
And we'll talk about ufology. He also writes extensively for Fate and Fortean Times and all those wonderful magazines that are full of all that spooky, high strangeness, weird stuff. But and as mentioned, he's also heads up the American chapter for the Centre for Fortean Zoology, which is a fantastic website even in itself.
Yeah, it is. We try and do a lot of investigations and work and put as many news stories out as possible, and just keep people informed of what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. I can't thank you enough for joining us tonight.
Oh, I've enjoyed it, Leah. Thank you.
And we'll speak again soon.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks.
Okay, that's Underworld for this week. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe and blessings to you all.
You've been listening to Australia's own Underworld Show with host Lia Ramses. The Underworld Show is produced in Perth, Western Australia by iProdigy Communications exclusively for Ghost Radio Australia and the Ghost Radio Network. Tune in every Sunday at 8 p.m. Perth time to hear fascinating guests and topics such as the one you just listened to. For more information on upcoming guests, events, and breaking news, visit www.underworldshow.com or www.ghostradio.com.au.